you. Thank you so much for having me. I hope everybody is well fed, and I'll try and speak loud over the stomach gurgles that I know we're all now trapped in a room and our stomachs are going to go. So my talk is called From Information to Innovation, and that's because my first life was in marketing, and I can't help the clickbaity titles. It's also a lesson that the moment you name something, it will stay that name, as I'm sure many of us have experienced, we'll just call it this goofy thing, and we'll name it better later, and then suddenly it's shipped to millions of people with a really ridiculous name. But what I can tell you about my talk that this title might not convey is that I want to dig into some of the research that we've done at Miro recently on innovation and talk a little bit about how we defined innovation, how we found it sort of happened, what some of those special ingredients might be. And then I'm going to switch gears a bit and talk about how information can really be that fuel or that foundation to an innovation practice. And I'm going to speak about information because, as Vitaly had mentioned, I am a UX researcher. Are there any researchers here today? Okay. Yes! I love that. Sorry, I didn't mean to throw chocolate at you. No, but okay, great. So we're going to talk a little bit about research. My slides probably aren't going to be as beautiful as the one the designers made, but we're going to get there. I'm also doing my slides in Miro today, so let's hope it goes well. Talk about testing in reality, eh, Chris? All right, so let's start with why do we care about innovation? It seems to kind of be a buzzword. I hear about it all the time. I don't think anybody would try and argue that we hate innovation and it's very bad. It seems obvious, but we're finding that right now a lot more people are more focused on innovation than ever before. And I had a really cool chat last night with Emily Campbell on our walk to the restaurant, and she's got a very cool talk in store tomorrow. And we were kind of talking about how, for a large majority of us, we've been in this tech upswing for so long, where, especially me, previously at Shopify, it was kind of like raining money. It was really fun. We got to break a lot of stuff and learn and do new stuff, and it was all great and cool. And I'm speaking to more and more people lately who are sharing that it no longer feels that way at work, that there's a lot more pressure, maybe a lot more waterfalling when it comes to product decisions and design. And it kind of feels as though we're in this thin resources, now is the moment, it's now or never environment where people are really pushing us to innovate and stay ahead of the market so that we can just survive. Okay, one last marketing kind of replica of my time. So this is called an S-curve, and it kind of demonstrates how often when you're the first mover in the market or the first leader with a product, you have this swing up. It's going great. You have people adopting your product, people loving it, everything is wonderful, and then it inevitably, and it will happen to everyone, hits a point where it's no longer so great. It starts to turn down. No matter how great you think you are, this will happen. We go from this massive positivity, optimism moment to, oh crap. So what they teach us all in business school is that you need to layer multiple S-curves. So you need to constantly innovate and actually start to shift your strategy and change your approach to product or service, whatever it is you're building, in the moment where it feels like it's going really well. So kind of counterintuitive, you want to just keep doing the thing that is the cash cow that's doing really, really great, but it's in that moment that you have to think about what's next. And then you get this lovely path of sustained growth. An example of where we can see this is Netflix, which is probably the example, if you've seen the S-curve, you've probably also seen Netflix mapped to the S-curve. But it's a really great example of a multi-generational company, a sustainable organization that has consistently reinvented itself with new innovation to continue leading in the market. So it started off by shipping people DVDs in the mail. Who would have thought that would have been wrong eventually? But they quickly pivoted to streaming in a moment actually where they were nearly about to go bankrupt. And then they did streaming, but they didn't rely entirely on streaming the whole time. They started looking at internationalization, going global. And now they're producing their own content. So now we have Netflix Originals, and they're their own production company. And who knows what's next for Netflix? Maybe someone here works there. But Netflix is an example of a company that consistently invests in innovations that they're riding a new S-curve before the first one drops them out. Consider mushrooms for a moment. Everyone's like, what? Let's get out of the talk of like companies and business graphs and just think about mushrooms. It's not because I came from Amsterdam. That's the secret theme today. Everyone did mushrooms before the conference. No. Okay. So think about mushrooms for a moment. And I bring up mushrooms actually because there are actually countless innovations based on mushrooms. You can look around, and it's wild because just today I've been noticing so many, like there's a mushroom pin at a little store that I went to after lunch. There is like a mushroom poster. But from everything from home decor to architecture to sustainable packaging materials to food to psilocybin and microdosing and some of these new inventions reaching us, people are commonly and countlessly finding ways to be inspired by mushrooms and innovate. But what if I were to ask you, or better, think of yourself and your team at work, to come up with an innovation that has mushrooms as a starting point? And this is the interactive bit, so can anyone give me an example? Sorry? Penicillin? Yes, but what about a new innovation? Come up with a new penicillin for us in this very moment. But penicillin is a great example of an innovation with mushrooms. Yes? Wow. That is so cool. I'm so glad you told me about that. We're all still stealing other people's innovations, though. Thank you. Can someone come up with, in this very moment, something innovative about mushrooms? Or like an innovation using mushrooms? Yeah, okay. I thought so. I made my partner do this thought experiment with me before I came here. And I came up with Toad, but with a mustache. And it's like Toad's fun friend in Mario Kart. And yeah, I basically gave Toad a fun cousin. That's as far as I got with innovation. If you were to ask me what do I need to innovate? What do I need to pull into my mind to make an innovation like that? I would not be able to give you the answer. And if you asked like McKinsey, or no offense if anyone here is from McKinsey, you might see something like this, where they really want you to circle back and move the needle and make sure you're not boiling the ocean or navel gazing. But there wasn't a lot of information out there about what makes companies innovative. It was kind of this nebulous, we don't know what, but look at all the cool stuff. Look at these mushroom CPUs. So we set out to do a bit of our own research. Predominantly, a wonderfully talented researcher on my team named Brittany did some research where she spoke with the most innovative companies based on BCG's most innovative companies list to find out what were the components or what exactly was in the environment, the team, that made these companies particularly innovative and recognized for innovation. And the key finding, really, was that it wasn't about money. It wasn't about, having rock star, like, PhD, child prodigy people on your team. It wasn't about location, being in, like, the perfect, startup environment. It all really came down to culture. And culture being the behaviors and the shared values that you would find in a workplace. And that culture, essentially, is what made these companies, and they shared a lot of similarities, it made these companies able to innovate the way that they did. I'm going to tell you what those components are. So we found that innovative cultures have purpose, they have agility baked into their culture, collaboration is very important, and finally, they have customer centricity. And I'll go over all 4 of these in a little case study, but then I'm really going to dial into customer centricity, and that's where our information part comes into our story today. So let's take a look at these 4, and I'm going to do it through the lens of Shopify, which is a place that I used to work way back in the day, actually. And I like Shopify because it's a great example of the place not really being like the place. I don't know if anyone knows, but Shopify was founded in Ottawa, Ontario, which is where I was born. Previous to that, we had the Parliament buildings and the Rideau Canal, which is a man-made canal that you can skate on, and not much else. So it kind of, against all odds, sprouted up in this pretty quiet community, like a government town. There was not a lot of money at first. All the investment came from friends and family. If I recall, they were stealing their Wi-Fi from the coffee shop that they were working above. And the people were great, but we were all like university dropouts. Like, we were all kids with just a lot of passion. We weren't, they weren't hiring people to fly in over from San Francisco. But Shopify really invested in their culture. So it starts with purpose. Oh, feedback for the team. All of my slides look like they're going to be slightly cut off today. My apologies. This would say it starts with purpose. And according to members of highly innovative companies, all of their companies were framed around a broader purpose. And this was about having an impact on users' lives and behavior. So the purpose was not like, let's make enough money to retire early. The purpose was something like, let's make commerce better for everyone. And then that purpose is consistently communicated, reinforced, brought up in rituals, conversation, collaboration. We had it on multiple walls in the office. We had it on our career page. We had it on our landing page. It was very clear that if you showed up for work, you were there to make commerce better for everyone. It drove our strategy. It drove our daily decisions, every level of altitude. So the case study that I'm going to kind of talk about today is the Shopify checkout. I was a researcher on this for a large majority of my time there. And what's interesting with the Shopify checkout is more or less it's the same for everyone. There's no tiering to the checkout. It doesn't matter what size of business you are or where you're located or how much money you're paying Shopify. Your checkout is going to be the one Shopify checkout. And when we optimize that checkout, we optimize it for everyone. So an example there is when we introduced a feature called Remember Me. Again, do not name things thinking you'll rename them soon after. We launched Remember Me, which was the checkbox at the end of the checkout that said, save all these details so that the next time I come to the checkout and put in my email or my phone number, it is all automatically added there. And that wasn't something that just one single store could implement, like a customer account or, Remember Me. It was something where if a customer saved their details on one checkout, it would then proliferate to any other Shopify checkout that they visited. So if I'm on, like Adidas, and I put in my information, and then 2 weeks later, I go to this mom and pop shop, and I put in my email, I have that same accelerated checkout experience thanks to that big box store doing that initial sign up for saving my info. So that's one little way. And then we eventually renamed it to Shop Pay. So come on. There we go. The next is staying agile. And I'm sure there are many people in this room that could speak more about agile development and agile practices than I can. But something that underscores agility at all of these companies that we spoke to, and something that was very present at Shopify, was embracing this fear, or embracing failure. Embracing the fear of failure, embracing failure, just accepting that it was bound to happen. This is a trope. I know we've all heard this a million times, like, you can fail forward here. It's a safe environment, and then you don't. So personal story. Here on the far right, we have the mobile version. This is what it looks like on the checkout. And you'll see that there's a little show order summary link there, and it's all folded up. And I was doing a lot of research, and I kept hearing from people that they didn't know where to put in their discount code. It's folded up in there. And they didn't know what their shipping was going to cost. It was really, they were like, I hate this. Like, I need more information. So I, very strong opinion, weakly held, decided that we should run an experiment in reality where you always learn better. You're about to hear why. Run an experiment where we auto-expanded the order summary. So that the first thing you see is not your express checkout and your contact, but the first thing you see is a place to put the discount code, your shipping charges, etc. And we ran an A/B test, and very quickly our conversion rates dropped by 2%, which is a lot if you're running an online business. So we quickly rolled that back. I changed my opinion. We continued to not disclose the order summary on the first step, but it was completely fine. I moved forward with better information. I stopped harping on about how annoying it was to find the discount code. We learned in reality, and we were able to iterate faster and, yeah, move more agile. They collaborate. I'm not a designer, but I got really excited with removing the background on everything. So Shopify kind of famously shut down all their offices when COVID hit, and then started really intentionally building these cross-functional collaboration opportunities. So there are things like bursts, where teams would get together for a week or more. We had something called Hack Days. This image on the far right is from a Hack Days, where we did a project for the checkout, which is now when you check out, you can see the estimated delivery date of your order. That wasn't there in 2017. The Hack Days project name was Where the F is My Order, based on a lot of user feedback, which was Where the F is My Order. And we had these really intentional moments where we came together. Because what we learned about collaboration in the research that we did at Miro as well is that it's not always organic, and that these really innovative companies actually set specific structured time for collaboration, and leadership enforces it. It also starts with recruiting the right people, so making sure that you have a diverse group of people, not only from backgrounds and cultures, but when you look at things like risk tolerance, functional role, tolerance for ambiguity, things like this. Okay, and then finally, they're obsessed with the customer. And this does not mean that they listen to everything the customer says. Again, going back to the checkout, for many, many years, all we heard was that people wanted a one-page checkout. Our research continued to show us that it performed worse than our three-page checkout. There are advantages to the three-page checkout, like you collected a user email earlier on, so you could send abandoned cart recovery. It was better to capture that information and then disclose costs over time instead of having it all on one big confusing page. It was probably more visually simple for them to understand what the next action was rather than presenting all the fields at once. So we had a lot of feedback, and we continued to, hold that strong opinion. But we were constantly testing with customers and testing really early. So again, like in Chris's talk, we heard about bringing things out and getting over that fear, or oh God, what if they don't like this? Well, you have an agile culture where failure is accepted and we're tolerant of it. So we were very, very quick to take things like paper prototypes and little mocky sketches for people to reorganize the content and look at the IA. We had mobile printed 3D printed phones. I'm sure there's a better solution for this now, but we did them with a 3D printer, and we would slot the paper in and up them so you could slide it. Anyways, it was about constantly checking in with the customer and understand what their needs were, getting out of that fear of showing work, and taking their voice into consideration. So eventually, what we wound up finding with the one-page checkout is that we built one that did start to perform better. We rolled it out, and then we had everyone freaking out that it was different. And at first, and I wasn't at Shopify at this point, but I was watching it happen, at first there was this resolution of no, it's one page now, it's the best one. But eventually they introduced a toggle for folks to switch between the two checkouts. And I think that at the end of the day, that empathy for the customer balanced with doing your research and knowing what's right and having a firm opinion on it is a great way to stay customer-centric. Okay, so those are our 4 kind of competencies. We have agility, we have collaboration, we have customer centricity, and then underneath all of that is a purpose that is also customer centric. It's rooted in making things better for the customer. But as Vitaly urged us, take off the rose-colored glasses. Don't only speak about the most perfect, optimistic frame of mind. And while that was one case study of a few things that went really well at Shopify, it wasn't always like that. And I'm sure that many of us here are not in super customer-centric companies. In fact, if I could get a show of hands, like who would say that their organization right now is really resolutely customer-centric? Nice. I'm going to talk to the researcher that didn't just raise her hand and give her a hug later. So I'll get into another study that we did in parallel. And it's a little bit more of a sobering view, but it's probably much more realistic than just speaking to these hyper-innovation companies. And in this study, we did a global survey. So we went worldwide. We had a much larger sample size so that we could generalize more of the findings. And we spoke with more conventional companies, their leaders and their knowledge workers, to understand how they viewed innovation. So what we found, and what sort of inspired a lot more of this research and this talk itself, is that everyone cares a lot about it and feels that it's more important now than ever. So 98% of leaders we spoke to were like, it's life or death, it's urgent, it needs to happen. 10% of leaders, not ones that we spoke to, this was a separate study from McKinsey, who I will make fun of, but then use their research, found that only 10% of leaders were actually satisfied with the amount of innovation that was happening. So we have this dissonance, right? We have everyone saying that innovation is super duper crucial, and then we have a lot of people, almost an equal amount, also saying that it's not happening. Our actions are not, we're not walking the talk. And what we found is that many of their key challenges on being innovative, because they wanted to, but they found that they couldn't, a lot of those challenges came down to the difficulty being customer-centric. And I love it when it just dovetails into, it's a researcher's dream. So what were 3 of those main challenges with customer centricity? The first one was that customer needs and trends are in constant flux. Everyone is always changing their minds. There are new trends all the time, things coming down the pipeline that you can't even imagine. And it's really difficult to run through a full product development cycle and have something launched that's still relevant and still meets those needs, especially before someone else gets there and does it before you. The second is that customer data is abundant. I had a very good chat last night as well about customer data and how the volume of it can feel like this physical entity. I think we'll hear a little bit more about it tomorrow in a talk. But there's a lot of customer data, like an overwhelming amount, and it's scattered and fragmented everywhere. It's really difficult to extract the signal from the noise, and it's even more difficult to do that at those crucial decision points when the time is here to make a decision and you just need something, some evidence, something to drive that choice. And then finally, that one core competency of an innovation company, which is being agile, also introduces some challenges because when teams move super agile and with a lot of velocity, they can often diverge and kind of go off and start working in silos. And if they don't stay connected to the purpose, and if there isn't a lot of bilateral communication and alignment, then stuff can start to happen in one section of the organization that is not aligned with the other section, and it kind of gets a little bit messy. We're going to do another case study, but this one is a fake one. This is Susie. She runs a lemonade stand. She's 11 years old. Business has been booming, but she's well aware of the S-curve. So Susie has decided to start innovating and introduce mushroom lemonade, which sounds disgusting. But she's really confident, and it's showing early signs of success. However, Susie is experiencing a couple of challenges when it comes to this new innovation cycle or ambition of hers. And lo and behold, all 3 of those challenges have to do with customer centricity. The first one is that Susie's customers and their needs are in constant flux. So a fellow CEO of Susie's, they have a founders meeting every Monday, shared with her that a lot of times it felt like his business strategy might not be aligned with their customers are actually looking for. He feels that understanding how their behavior has changed, them making a prediction about how it's going to change even more in the future can be really difficult. Susie has the same experience. So she thought that mushrooms were the innovation. But lately, customers have been coming to her lemonade stand and sharing some interest or some desire in other root fungi-like vegetables that they feel they'd rather ingest than mushrooms. It's really taken her by surprise. She and her fellow CEOs, 56% of them, feel that customer demands are constantly changing, and that's actually the most likely thing to affect their profitability. Another founder friend of hers feels that the data issue is his biggest problem. So he shared that trying to take all of that unstructured data, and we're collecting it everywhere now, whether it be through customer calls, sales calls, UX research, behavioral data that you're tracking on the store, website, wherever. There's a lot of it, all from different sources, and it's unstructured. He shared that he actually doesn't think anyone's fully figured it out. And my heart goes out to him because he's actually in healthcare. This was somebody that we spoke with at like a really large medical practice. And now I realize just how bad it probably is. He's felt that all the new systems and technologies were creating more and more data, and there was kind of less of that light at the end of the tunnel on how to make sense of it and apply it to their work. So what this looks like for Susie is that she initially wanted to be super customer-centric, so she set out with like a survey after a lemonade purchase. She speaks to her friends after school. She went to a soccer game recently and ran a small focus group on the sidelines. She's doing everything she can to capture the voice of the customer. But then when it comes down to deciding what new products she might make or how she might sell her lemonade differently, she's really confused about, what of this matters most? What's just noise? What should she take with her to her next decision? And then finally, these silos that can form. So the agile way of working, we all love it, and we love being more autonomous. And I personally really like seeing teams feeling like they have that freedom and that responsibility to go out and connect with the customer themselves and bring that data back. But it's the bring the data back, probably because it's scattered and fragmented, that we don't always see fully done in a nice way, I suppose. So there's a risk that people go out, they don't bring all the data back, they don't share that story back in their org, and then they're left with individual silos of product development and change. For example, someone might speak to one of the dads at the soccer game and hear that mushroom martinis were a really good idea. And now they're selling mushroom martinis at the lemonade stand, not aligned with Susie's strategy. It can go a little bit haywire. So how can Susie build a culture of customer centricity? Well, our research identified 4 competencies of those innovative companies that did have customer centricity at their core culture. These were research and data, concepting tools, feedback loops, and experimentation. So first, with experimentation and concepting tools, this meant that all functions would collaborate together to come together and look at how they might iterate intentionally based on data and feedback they were receiving from customers. So it looked like those paper prototypes that we had, or that I demonstrated earlier, where people from across all functions really go to the user or go to each other and start to play around with what a solution might look like, being very open to feedback and quick and agile when it comes to iteration. Prototyping tools, so like I said, design, not my thing. FigJam even scares me a little bit. So things like Miro, Canva, even Keynote are places where I feel more comfortable going in and prototyping if I can't just have a pen and paper. And that really helps me express myself visually, share an idea with colleagues, and go from there. I had this really fun collaborative activity, but I don't think we have time for it. What we can do is after the break, I'll be at the fireplace, and you can come and chat with me about it. But something that you could take into your organization, since we don't have time to do it today, is these sort of challenges where you think about a trend or a problem or something that you'd like to respond to, and you come up with potential solutions. And they can be those like first bad ideas or maybe something that you've thought a lot about, but just any starting point to start to sketch it out onto paper or whatever tool you're using and play around with receiving feedback and iterating on that. I like to start it with a how might we statement, and the example that I had here was going back to Netflix. What if our trend or our challenge was media consumption habits. And our how might we statement was a personal problem of mine as a Canadian living in the Netherlands and traveling around Europe a lot. How might we simplify the process of accessing desired streaming content for international users so they can enjoy their favorite programs without regional restrictions or limited availability? And then the idea is that you'd go in and you'd sketch a couple concepts, nothing fancy, nothing perfect, definitely nothing that looks that nice, and start to explore what a solution to this might be. Then you can bring that to the people you work with, or maybe you can even test it with some customers. And this is the key part where, as we heard earlier, research is not always reflective of a real environment, and that's very true. But the way that we frame research can really help us get a little bit closer to true intent or reality than just sort of, I know no one would do this, but pointing at something and saying, like, would you use this? Do you like this? So some questions that I really like are, how might this have helped you in a specific situation in the past? So instead of asking people to project forward and imagine and be all fantasy land, you actually tether them in real experience. Another one is, if this is real, what would it replace in your life? So there's some small element of sacrifice. You have to actually make them think about, like, oh, I would, I guess, stop paying for Canva if I had Miro. No, I wouldn't. And then you're like, oh, okay, that sounds a little more true than this looks great. So thinking of trade-offs or, some small sacrifice. And then finally, just tether them in, like, what do you currently do today? What's your experience like today, and how would this change this? Tell me about the next week of your life with, the tools that you usually use, and then walk me through that with this. And then you debrief, and you ask yourself, what could they replace? Would this actually improve their life? Is this actually aligned with our purpose and what we're trying to achieve? What were their key objections? What were their reasons to say no? What would we have to change if this were like a selling situation? And then I rephrased this one over lunch. What considerations might exist once we've revealed the circle of stupidity? What might we need to change to make this fit their lives better? And then finally, research, data, and feedback loops. And when I gave this talk earlier this year to just a crowd of researchers, this was kind of the crux of the talk. It was really about these two elements in innovation and how it fueled innovation. So I'm going to frame it a little differently this way about how all of us can look at the discovery phase and how it's really not, like a phase that's just for research or for really exploratory designers. And when I say research and data and feedback loops, there are a lot of people that are laser focused on collecting customer feedback or feeling like they're constantly hearing the voice of the customer. But this is actually a little bit of a shift that brings it more into your internal environment than it does with the customer. And the first shift is understanding that your knowledge and your knowledge management is actually much more about people than it is about the insights. So where I used to be like really, really passionate about finding the perfect knowledge repo, I've kind of let that go a little bit, not entirely, but a little bit, and focused much more on the people in my organization and how we're sharing our own knowledge. This is a really great book, The Knowledge Creating Company, and it talks about tacit or like individual or personal knowledge and explicit knowledge. And if you're able to make tacit expertise or knowledge explicit for your company to take advantage of, and it's very difficult, but this is really what we see in innovation companies, is that every individual doesn't kind of live in this silo of expertise, but rather they find ways to communicate, to collaborate, to experiment together, to give each other feedback in a way that draws that personal understanding out to the group level. And then you end up in these really like knowledge creation, knowledge management companies where the knowledge is just organic. Like everyone has it. You can't remember when you didn't know that story or know that meaning. The next one is that feedback loops matter internally as much as externally. So there's a question earlier about like what happens if you don't have access to the customer? And yes, that's difficult. Ideally, you have access to the users. But there's a lot to be learned just by doing critique and feedback cycles within your own organization so that you can innovate in an organizationally appropriate way or one that makes sense. So this is a great book by Von Tan about innovation in food companies. And he speaks about these like crit sessions that happen amongst chefs when they create a new dish, and I'm sure whatever they're making is delicious. But they'll really critique it to see like, is this an appropriate dish for this restaurant? Does this reflect our restaurant's way of cooking and the way that we do food here? Which is like a really hard thing to explicate and to talk about pragmatically. But through these feedback loops and this internal discourse, you start to feel more and more intuitive about what would be organizationally appropriate based on what you know. And then the third one is that intelligence is at the group level. Again, I don't know where Emily is right now, but she was like blowing my mind last night talking about some of this in other regions of the world. But intelligence should never be seen as an individual expert. And something that I've really started to shift with my teams at Miro is that I don't incentivize or reward people or measure impact on how smart they are or how much of a domain expert they've become. But I've started to really weigh impact as a measure of the organization's success. So you're measured on how well everyone else knows something. What's the quality of the organization's knowledge? That's what I care about more than yours. There should be this culture and this incentivization of sharing what you're learning and sharing what you know. And we do that in a few ways. So we got a little AI chat app, like I'm sure everyone has, that helps you find research. But as part of it, if you ask about a specific subject, it'll also tell you the person in the company to go speak to, so that we're not just sitting closed behind our data and our screens, but we're going out and seeking, I'll chat with Brittany about professional service providers. Internally on the research team, we do something called Hot Ones, which has nothing to do with hot wings. But after we do a research study, we'll come up with our point of view or our strong opinion, and we'll present it to the team, and then everyone ranks it on how spicy it was, from I need hot sauce to call the ambulance. But it's kind of this forum where it's like almost a little debate club, and we shape our point of view and we share it with others, and we start this discourse around is this a new story? Is this a new meaning that we're going to take in? We have voice of the customer. Again, so much more of the focus on who your presenters are, who it is sharing the knowledge. Go and speak to these people. And then finally, we have monthly UX research spotlights where we do a fake talk show, and it's all fun and games. But the point here is that we try and get away from the data and the facts, and we bring it into the person and the story, and we look at in extending and increasing that knowledge for the group, not just for ourselves. Okay, I'm about to get Oscar music. So this crazy timing, this morning, my friend was on a hike in Portland and posted this photo of a mushroom. And it really caps off, no pun intended, this talk. Because why I'm talking about mushrooms is that they really are quite cool. If you've ever been walking and you stumble upon a mushroom, it's kind of this miraculous wow factor of where did this come from? It's so beautiful in this natural environment. They feel kind of magic or miraculous. And I think that a lot of the time, as researchers or as people or in companies who want to innovate, we feel like our innovations are these mushrooms. We want to be that mushroom. We want to be miraculous and magical and attention-grabbing. But the coolest thing about mushrooms, in my opinion, has nothing to do with them above ground and what you can see. Because underneath the ground, and the reason that mushrooms survive, are their mycelium, or these mycelial networks that essentially communicate and transmit information back and forth. And they stretch tens of thousands of miles, and they pass information so that the entire system can survive. And they're completely unseen. And I think that this is actually where innovation happens as well. What we can see is the mushroom, but where innovation happens is in the actual roots of a company. It's our capacity to transmit information back and forth, to make sure that that information is tethered to a purpose, considers customer centricity. And while we might not be the ones to present the innovation, we know that we're part of that larger system and that group knowledge that is so key. So we learned that innovation begins with culture. And we learned that those cultures are ones where stories were really important, sharing information and having a group understanding, but also play, that experimentation, those feedback loops, connecting with the customer. It created those cultural roots that are really the bedrock of innovation. And because we only have one researcher in our audience today, I think my question or my encouragement to you would be, after this talk, to go out and think not of your researchers or your designers as the kind of stewards of customer centricity or the experts that will come and tell you facts and go away. But think of them as kind of like a catalyst, like a caffeine shot when it comes to your culture being more customer-centric. And think about ways that you can involve them through experimentation, through feedback, through collaboration that might build a more innovative culture at your organization. Thank you.
Hello, Emma. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Please,
do I still have time to sit on the couch?
Yes, mushrooms.
Hardly.
Is it just me? But when I think about mushrooms, most recently I think about Last of Us.
I can't watch scary things.
Yeah, that's...
No.
Mushrooms. Mushrooms, yes. But there was a few questions that came up. I want to bring up some as well. There is still a concerned citizen here. Somewhere. Always posing very challenging questions. One of them is, when do you trust research and when do you trust your vision? What people say, what people do isn't the same thing, and sometimes the audience doesn't know what they want, or you aren't really speaking to the right audience, and it might change as the product hits the market. How do you know?
Well, you're not speaking to the market or your audience to figure out what they want, because it's not their job to tell you what they want. It's our job to build the solutions to their problems or their unmet needs. So I would start there and say that you're not meeting with your customer to understand, like, did you do the thing nicely or design it in the right way? You're looking to understand, like, what is their lived experience, where are the gaps, where are there opportunities to improve that? And I think that can always go hand in hand with a company vision, depending on your company vision. But I've never seen a company vision that's like, we're going to build it, it's going to be blue, it's going to be 1 meter high, and that's it. Usually it's like, we want to innovate in this way or make this type of thing, or I have this big idea. And then it's essential that we understand, okay, well, how does that going to fit into reality?
Makes sense. From my perspective, I think one thing that mentioned as well, in the very end when you highlighted just some of the activities that you do to make the research a bit more visible, I think that very often the research function in organizations or companies is very much siloed. So they fit in, the insights do fit in a product development in some way. But most organization has no idea about what research exactly has done.
Yeah.
And they consequently don't know much about what the customer's experience is like. So I think this notion of making research insights or these nuggets of wisdom somehow more visible for the entire organization is actually quite valuable. And also this fact that, of course, I think that many of us here maybe are in an organization where you just don't have a research function. Anybody has no researchers on the team? A few, right?
Fewer people than I expected.
Yeah, it used to be much worse, I think.
Yeah.
But I think even then, it might be one researcher with a lot of designers and developers. So I guess my question would be, so if you happen to be kind of trying to move towards research, and there is nothing against it, like really no strong sentiment against it, because I think that every management wants to know that the customers are satisfied. This is why we run all this NPS surveys all the time. But
can we talk about those?
No. I mean, we can, sure. But I mean, how did you step up the role, the function of research in a company where you're just getting started? What is the path to make it established?
I think first you need to set proper expectations around what they can expect from research. And companies are really used to delivery functions like engineering, where it's like, cool, you shipped the code, I can see the code. And design, you made the design, I can see the design. And research, like, we have reports, but it's not, like, a report means nothing, right, if you just look at it flat. What research does is increase the intuition of a company. We sharpen decision makers. We make you more agile in making choices and choosing a direction. And that's largely unseen work. Like, we're not a delivery function.
That's true.
So I think that first, by setting that expectation of, hey, I'm going to build a research team, or I'm a researcher and I'm going to start doing research for you, and this is what you can expect from me. And then make commitments about how you will make the research visible, and get buy-in by saying, you won't be more intuitive, you won't make quicker decisions. Like, your part of the bargain is that you listen to the stories that I'm telling, and you ask questions and argue with them if you feel like they're not, accurate. Like me, I was telling everyone for the longest time to expand the discount code. It really was not a nice idea. And having that open discourse. So, yeah. I think that getting started is just be realistic about what they can expect. We're not a delivery function. And then make sure that they're aligned on their side of the bargain, which is engaging with the research. You'll bring it into those forums to share where you can.
Yeah, I think also one interesting thing that really surprised me recently was the fact that sometimes you find research function in some way or the other kind of almost hidden away from product development in customer success teams or in sales, because they need to maintain relationship with customers kind of ongoing, be it B2C or B2B.
Yeah.
And so research can be everywhere. It doesn't have to be living just within the UX. It was very surprising finding for me.
It's like the mycelial, this is the metaphor. It is that mycelial network. And frankly, I used to care so much about where research reported into. And now, if you're reporting into a leader that will advocate for you and is in good standing with the C-suite, that's where you should be. All you need is that coverage and that advocacy, and then your role is to make sure those insights are infused across the company, not just on an embedded design team.
Yeah. So maybe 2 more questions. We have a couple of minutes. The only researcher in the audience, yes, right here, asks, as a UX researcher, you can never know 100% of the time. So how can you be so confident in making decisions when you know that it can have very negative consequences and make you look bad? For example, decrease of 2% conversion rate. It's kind of navigating this, we suggesting that we would do this and then it breaks or so. That can feel daunting.
Yeah, I think every company should be data informed, not data driven. And if you're using your research to make clear this is a totally risk-free choice, then you're not using research in the right way. So understanding that it carries some ambiguity, it's never going to be perfect. Having an environment where it's okay to fail and drop checkouts by 2% conversion for 30 minutes and then fix it. And yeah, just being honest with yourself as well, especially with qualitative research. A lot of people try and make qualitative research feel as close to quantitative as they can so that it feels really academic and good. But I really like embracing the messy nature of qualitative research. I think that that's what makes it so fun and unique. And just finding leaders or, trying to teach your leaders and increase the research maturity that that's okay and that that's actually an advantage, not a disadvantage.
Talking about risk-free, that's just the perfect bridge right there. Lucy is wondering, innovation is not risk-free, so how do I convince my customers and clients to take this risk and invest time and money in research after all?
That's a tough one. I don't work with clients, but based on the talks today, yikes. You guys do it sounds tough. You could show them the S-curve graph. No, but I would look at it as focusing on those customer centricity challenges maybe and saying, customer needs are always changing. We have a lot of data. It's going to keep growing. We risk getting lost in it. We need to form an opinion. And the time is now. The time when you're feeling like you're in the right spot is exactly the time to start playing. And whether I don't know how big the customer is, but whether you do it as a lab or whether you do it as a small experiment, there are ways to de-risk investment in innovation that make it feel a little bit more playful and light. And you can also approach it as learning opportunities instead of product investment opportunities, where you're not necessarily saying, hey, look, we're going to go build a completely new checkout. You have to get on board. But hey, I'm curious about this thing with the checkout. I don't know how that works in client relationships, but that's what I would do in my embedded experience.
Yeah. So we're kind of almost on time. But Marek wanted to clarify, was it 2% or was it 2 percentage points?
This was in 2015. I think it was 2%. Yeah. Don't get mad at me. If anybody here has a Shopify store and in 2015 your sales went a bit weird for one day.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. I'm sorry, it was too far back.
That's okay. So just talking about that, and I know, Amanda, I have minus 33 seconds. Just one thing that came up as well. So you mentioned that free page checkout was performing better. That's surprising. What were some of the other surprising insights you learned that you can share?
That is the longest question you could ask me. Insights.
Well, maybe at the
you have
fireplace.
30 seconds. Yeah, I'm happy to talk about it at the fireplace. With checkout, definitely a lot about like disclosure of information. I think it like links really well to Chris's talk about where are you asking for people's attention. We had to introduce complexity in the right areas. Like we couldn't make it too easy to check out because at that point you're dealing with dark patterns. But at the same time, we wanted to increase conversion as much as we could. We kind of had like the buyer perspective and the merchant perspective. So there are a lot of insights as we played around with where to put things and when to show things. Yeah, like we tried bringing in information into the cart so that you never had to get to checkout before you had an understanding of what your total cost would be. We did like ECG monitors to test like stress as people went through checkouts. Yeah,
wow.
it was really fun, but imperfect science. It looked cool.
Right.
Yeah, lots of insights. I'll chat with anyone who wants to chat.
Yeah, so if you have more questions or are striving for more insights, you can always find Emma in the fireplace. Well, not always, today. I think it's not like
No,
you're
I'm
hanging out
moving.
around
Have you seen that
fireplaces.
fireplace?
Yeah.
I will be there all week.
Okay, excellent, fantastic. So you can ask all kind of questions around research and everything else. With this, thank you so much Emma, for sharing your insights.
Thank you, everyone.